Hello gamers, Power Word Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about the endgame of Classic WoW Hardcore. So I've been wanting to talk about this for quite a while, but there's just been so many other things to kind of go over on the channel. We've done lots of character guides, lots of gear guides and things of that nature, and it's really just kind of fallen under the radar. But now with Anniversary kind of wrapping up, there's just a lot more time to talk about just general WoW things. So I wanted to come back and revisit this and see what you guys think about it, because I know I have a lot of hardcore people that are lurking in the comments, and some people that watch the channel and things of that nature. So give me your feedback, guys. I can't wait to hear it. So a lot of people talk about the early game with hardcore because that's pretty much where a lot of the focus is, right? The idea is kind of getting to level 60, not the end game. And I think that's why a lot of people love hardcore, actually, because it's not focused on the end game. You kind of just get to really take your time, enjoy the process, go through everything. And realistically, if a character does make it to 60, from what I've seen, a lot of people just don't really have a ton of interest in raiding or doing dungeons. And it's not necessarily that they don't like that type of content, but the goal was to get to 60, right? And if they want to do that content, they can typically do it on the normal servers where they don't have the extreme penalty of losing that character. Because for most players, if they lose a character at level 60, it's going to be difficult to kind of pick up and go again, at least with the mentality of grinding back to 60 for the explicit purpose of doing a raid or doing a dungeon. Obviously people will level new characters, all the time if they really enjoy the game, but they're not doing it with the intent to kind of get back into that Molten Core or Blackwing layer. So it just makes perfect sense that, this isn't a topic that's talked about much, but I actually played hardcore back in the first iteration of servers that launched. So the most recent ones, the ones for Anniversary, I didn't touch those because they launched basically at the same time as Anniversary. I wanted to really focus on Anniversary. But the original ones that came out, I think, if I remember correctly, they were the only thing kind of happening at the time. So I was like, yeah, why not? I'll kind of try this, and it'll probably be fun to just mess around. And I messed around a little bit. It was fun, but then I find myself in endgame, and I'm kind of farming endgame mats like essences and herbs and things of that nature. And I was like, I actually really like this version. And at first I couldn't really pinpoint why. And then it kind of hit me that it's just the slow, methodical vibe. So for me, I'm not like a big leveler. I don't love the leveling process or anything as much as some other people that play hardcore. But the one thing that I really did like was just the weight of every decision that's felt in the end game, even in things like farming. So, just to give a funny example, if I'm farming on my character in Ungaro Crater, on a normal server that's not hardcore, I'll jump off the top of the mountain, try and save some time, things of that nature, right? To just get to different spawns faster and things like that. Maybe I'll die 1 out of 100 times, and that's fine. But on hardcore, you don't find yourself doing anything like that. There's no shortcuts, right? You're kind of planning everything out. You're methodical, and even when doing something simple like farming, there's an element of danger if you get really, really careless. And I kind of like that. You couldn't just W key through everything, as people say. And it really added that sense of weight to the game. And to kind of give another point of comparison, I play Path of Exile, and I used to play Path of Exile hardcore. Now I kind of play a mix of hardcore and softcore, mostly softcore though, just because they made the game like, it's so easy to die in that game. It's kind of nothing like Classic WoW, and it almost feels like very unfair unless you're just playing an overpowered build. Like, there's some builds you play and it's basically impossible to die, and that's not fun. And then there's some builds you play where it's very easy to die, and that's not fun either. Classic WoW has a much better kind of balance in that respect. But anyway, I played a PoE for quite a bit, and one of the main gripes I have with kind of modern PoE softcore is that a lot of the good items in the game that come from bosses are just so easily obtainable nowadays, because you don't even have to be kind of good at the fight. Like, what people do is they just make these characters, they boss rush by having like a ton of damage, and they basically have 6 chances to kill the boss because you have 6 portals typically, and you'll just kind of go in there, brute force it, slam your head against the wall, get the good items, sell them, or use them for your character, and it's just a little bit boring and played out for me, right? Because if you ever want to try and do an intermediary approach where you're not just going full send it, and you actually want to have a character where you maybe don't want to experience the permadeath of hardcore, but you still want to try and do the fight properly and not die in the fight and things of that nature, it's kind of just a fool's errand, right? Because at that point, you're just putting yourself behind all the other players who are just taking advantage of the fact that there's very little penalty for death in Path of Exile overall. And that really stuck out to me because it's very similar to WoW, right? In classic WoW, there's very little penalty for death, just running back to your corpse. And that was obviously intentional. This game was designed with EverQuest in mind, and in that game, they felt the death penalty was really harsh. Retrieving your body was a bit more complicated, and then you also lost experience and things of that nature. So they've opted not to go with that in this game. And I think for the base game, it makes a ton of sense, and it's probably one of the reasons why WoW was such a popular MMO, right? Because if you have too many penalties, ultimately people do play games for fun, and they're maybe just a bit turned off. But it was kind of nice feeling the weight again when I was playing classic WoW, and it was nice knowing everybody else had to play by that rule set, So I tend to consider myself a more methodical player in general, so maybe it's a bit self-serving, but I like the fact that it was well, yeah, somebody else could maybe be doing this faster than me, but they're probably going to die eventually, or something like that, and it just makes you feel better about taking your time and, not super trying to squeeze every last ounce of efficiency out of every farming session. And while I was doing the farming, I was obviously thinking of endgame because, you farm materials for the endgame, essentially. And I'm kind of a weird player in the sense that I like farming. I didn't even have necessarily an intention to play endgame because the thought process was, well, it's just going to be really difficult to, kind of get these things going. And I didn't really ever get into any of the endgame rating or anything like that. My character just kind of sat. I have this bunch of mats in the bank, and I never really got into anything. But still, it got me thinking about endgame and there's not many people involved in this now, but could there be a way to get more people involved in the endgame in a way that doesn't conflict with kind of the normal nature of hardcore? And I came up with a few ideas, so I'm just curious what you guys think. Maybe I'll hate them. Maybe I'll think they're interesting. But that's the point of this channel, right? Just discussing ideas. So let me know what you think. And the first one would be just very simple. It's kind of like the easiest pill to swallow if you're a super purist about classic hardcore. And for all of these, basically, none of these would affect characters that are below level 60. So the whole 1 to 60 experience that's very prized in people's minds, that would stay entirely the same. They would only be active after level 60. Because the whole point is, we're not trying to interfere with the experience 1 to 60. We're just potentially trying to create a new and separate experience post 60 that more people can participate in. So the first idea would just be, once you hit 60, you unlock the ability for other characters to level or progress a little bit faster. Now, this can be done in multiple ways. I've heard people float the idea of heirlooms and stuff of that nature. I really don't like the heirloom solution to the problem. I get that heirlooms are cool. They're really iconic looking based on, weapons we all love. And it's always cool to just be really overpowered in the early game once you've kind of already completed a challenge. However, I think the main thing is that they damage the economy of the game a little bit, right? Because one of the cool parts about hardcore is that, once you're 60 and maybe you're creating the character, you have to kind of buy some gear for it, right? And maybe there's some guy, he's level 30, he just got a cool sword that he doesn't need, he puts it on the auction house, and, now you're paying him for his sword, you're getting the sword, he's getting the gold, and it really helps the gold kind of trickle down a bit from the, players at the top who are obviously going to have more gold to the players at the bottom who need it for things like mounts and things of that nature. So I thought that was really cool. And I think even though heirlooms wouldn't be super common in the system because you would have to first get to 60 and then you would have to pay for them, it probably still would affect the economy a little bit. And ultimately, I don't think it's necessary. We don't need to do this for Classic WoW Hardcore. So I think that the best solution is maybe just like a small experience bonus or something of that nature. Just something to kind of make the next go around a little bit easier. And, maybe it wouldn't be the end all be all change, but for some people, it could be the difference maybe in like, what? Maybe I'll go again and try and get back with a guild for Blackwing Lair because I have a little bit of an XP bonus now. So something like that could be cool, and I feel like it's kind of very minor. Doesn't really impact the integrity of the game that much. And I think that's the most easy change to implement. Now the next one is a bit more radical, but I find it pretty interesting. So this would be stasis. And what stasis is it's like something that you press. It's basically like a Petri flask, right? That you press and it just instantly teleports you out of the dungeon, encases you into stasis, and then you're magically warped back to your home city, wherever your Hearthstone is. Now, this already sounds terrible to a lot of people, I can tell, right? But there's going to be a lot of caveats as to how stasis can be used, okay? So the first thing I'd want to do if you had this is remove all Petri flasks. And the idea of stasis was actually kind of based on Petri, because Petri seems to be the thing, in my opinion, that really does keep the hardcore raiding scene alive. Obviously, with the OnlyFans stuff that went on this time around, on anniversary servers, they weren't using Petri, but that's because it's a very specific content-centric guild. For most of the guilds that are trying to operate, I feel like operating them probably wouldn't be feasible if Petris weren't a thing. I'd have to really ask a player that's done a lot of that stuff. I think Glavestorm, he's a very popular hardcore priest. He sometimes watches the videos on this channel, so if he happens to watch this video, maybe he can weigh in down in the comments. But, from what I've seen, based on clips and things of that nature, it seems like Petri is kind of an integral part of hardcore at this point for endgame raiding, and it would just be very, very difficult to have a raiding scene without Petri because, people would be dying left and right, obviously. So with that in mind, I wanted to kind of keep that idea and essence of Petri, but change it a little bit. So for this mode, if we're going to have the stasis, we're not going to have the Petri, because the idea is we don't want you to have access to Petri 24/7. And to be honest, I think this solution would actually even go a little bit of some ways with the people who don't like Petri in its current form, because it's not quite as powerful as current form Petri, because technically you can just stockpile current form Petris, basically to the moon, and they almost protect you against everything. Not quite everything, but most things. So this is less powerful than that in the sense that it's going to be heavily limited and regulated. So the idea would be that you get these stasis tokens, or whatever you want to call them, maybe like once a week or once every 2 weeks, even once every 3 weeks. You would kind of adjust the amount that you get, and I think that a good way to do it would be early on when there's not as many raids, you don't get as many, and then once you have all the raids open and unlocked, you would maybe get like one a week or something like that. So you'd start out getting maybe like, a piece of one a week that you can't use, and then once you get 2 or 3 pieces, you can combine them to make a full token, and then you maybe essentially get a whole token once you're in the later phases and more raids have unlocked. And these would only be usable in raids, or maybe dungeons. We could obviously debate and split hairs there, but the thought would be you don't want them being used in open world. The open world still stays dangerous. So if you have to go out and do farming, things of that nature, you still can't mess around out there. It still has that weight, basically. But these would basically replace Petri flasks. And the idea is, like I said, you have limited access to them. The good news is that even newer players who can't afford them, have access to the stasis system. But again, it's way more limited. And think of it kind of like this. You're in Molten Core, right? You just got to level 60. And the first week you get to level 60, you're eligible to start earning the stasis token. So you hit level 60, you wait 3 weeks just kind of doing the mundane stuff, or maybe 2 weeks, and then you get your first stasis token. And now you're ready to go into Molten Core. So you go into Molten Core, and oops, there's a catastrophe. You have to hit that button, and, be teleported out. Now you don't have your stasis token again. Now you have an interesting decision to make, right? Do you want to go back into Molten Core next week? Because remember, you just got your stasis token this week, so you're not going to be eligible to get one for next week. And that means that if you die, you have permadeath. But you have the choice, right? You can always sit out a week or two, wait to get another reform token, and go in. And you can keep your token if you don't have to use it. So, if you go in on that week that you first get your token and you don't have to use it, now you're protected next week. So it kind of encourages good play and punishes you for, making mistakes and having to use the stasis, but you're not getting instantly punished with, total obliteration of your character. Now you actually have a choice. Do you want to put your character up to face total obliteration, or do you want to play it safe, lose out on some loot, take a little bit of a nerf in that way in order to just ensure that your character doesn't completely rip the next time you go into a dungeon or a raid. So I think that'd be really cool because it kind of lets people with varying amounts of time play the game in different ways as well. If you're somebody who works a ton of hours, you just can't invest much time into the game. If you do hit level 60, you're probably hanging on to that stasis token for dear life, and once you lose it, you're not going back into a raid until you have it again. But if you're somebody that has a lot more time, you feel like you're just a better player, you feel really confident, then maybe even if you do have to blow that stasis token, you're willing to take the risk in the next raid or the raid after that. So I think it's a cool system to give players some agency while still giving them somewhat of a way out, right? Not just completely bricking their characters. And I think it would be really cool. Now, how you would actually use it is an interesting topic too, because you could have it be a thing where it activates automatically if it's in your inventory. But I kind of don't really like that. I like the idea of having to press it, kind of like you have to do with Petri. Like, just having a Petri in your bags is not a panacea. And I kind of like that idea too in this version where, a Petri can save some mess ups, a stasis token can save some mess ups, but not everyone, right? If you get one shot, if you do something really silly, like you just, warrior charge into Golemag or something like that, and you get basically one tap by all the ads and him, your stasis crystal is not going to save you there. So there's still some element of danger even within the raids. And I think it would make some very interesting decisions. It could cause even potentially some drama in some cases. Like imagine like a main tank stasising on a fight and aggro just goes to somebody else. It could be kind of interesting, right? So yeah, I think it's a cool idea, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think of that. And the last thing would kind of just be, this is a very controversial one, I would say. I've thought about this, and I thought it has some cool aspects, but ultimately, I think it just doesn't really fit because so many people love the idea of permadeath still being a tangible thing that could happen to your character. But the final option would be, once you hit 60, instead of losing your character when you die, you actually lose pieces of gear. So obviously it's still a heavy punishment, and we're still playing into that idea of, adding weight to your decisions in the game because they can be very punishing. But it's not quite as weighty as like losing your entire character. So it's a bit of a compromise there. And I actually thought this way would be a little bit interesting too, because it could make use of a lot of the kind of bad gear, quote unquote, or the duplicate gear that people normally get in MC. So once you've been running like a raid for a while, a lot of people end up not needing stuff, which is pretty common. And this could be an interesting way to make sure that every piece kind of matters. And even while everybody is kind of alive and hasn't lost any pieces of gear yet, it still kind of, changes the loot dynamic a bit, because now maybe somebody actually wants another pair of, they want another Bloodfang hood in case that character dies and they lose that slot or something of that nature. Maybe you can do something like a RuneScape where you can pay gold to protect certain slots, and then other slots are available to lose items, right? So if you had like a Kiss of the Spider, you could pay to ensure that, and maybe, depending on how rare the item is or its item level, it costs more gold to do than for a weaker item like a Priebus item. So there's a lot of cool things I think that system opens up. The only issue is that I think a lot of people still like the permadeath aspect of hardcore. Like, if you were to completely remove the permadeath, I think that just kind of makes it so it's not hardcore for a lot of people. It kind of ruins that vibe. And even though we'd be talking about level 60, so there is still permadeath pre-level 60, I think people just wouldn't really be into it as much overall. If anything, that might be an idea for kind of like a separate type of server, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I don't know. Just some ideas. Let me know what you guys think. I'm very interested in the comments, but I just really like the idea of playing around with that weight of death. And I think that it'd be a really cool thing to do kind of going forward. And I think WoW is in a very unique position to leverage and play around with this because they already have a great base game. So the problem with kind of other games that focus too much on punishing players, like something like a full loot PvP game or something, kind of like Mortal Online 2, I think is a good example, is that in a game like that, there's kind of no escape. There's no refuge, right? You're just going into the game as a new player, and if you die, like you lose your stuff, you have to start, kind of all over again. Essentially, not all over again, but you understand what I mean. And there's no other version of the game they can play that doesn't involve that. But in WoW, you have a fantastic base game of, Classic Anniversary, Era, whatever version you're in at the time. So you can always go back to playing that if you don't want to have to deal with the harsher penalties. And when you're feeling like taking on more of a challenge, feeling like taking on more risk, when you want to feel that weight, you want your decisions to matter, you want your planning to matter, then, you just take a spin on the hardcore realms, and it'll be fun. So, let me know what you guys think. And if you like this video, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys next time. Thank you.